I would sit on the floor and look at the moon
Hmm.
and talk to God and say, why?
Wow.
What was going on in my mind is that I must have been a pretty awful person.
Hmm.
I'm flat out on the floor
Hmm.
speaking in tongues. There were some very serious allegations against my husband. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I would wake up and pray for an hour or more. I didn't know the circumstances, but
Wow.
God did. So if
Wow.
I'm praying in
Wow.
tongues, you
Wow.
know,
Look
when
at
you're,
how this makes you a victim of your own imagination. So how did it begin to come apart for you then?
I just started rehashing what I
Hmm.
believed, because it was
Hmm.
quite shocking that
Hmm.
Aunt Kathy was asking questions,
Hmm.
especially since I'm the one that
Right. You
what
started this
was
whole
the
thing in the
I
family.
started this whole thing.
Hmm.
I wept and I grieved that I had lived my life
Hmm.
to please this God that doesn't exist.
Wow.
I walked out of my bedroom
Hmm.
and I said, that's it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I honestly felt a lifting.
Praise him. All right. Well, I'm here today with Kathy after faith. And I feel like this is a unique episode because usually when I do these life after faith episodes, they're people who they've deconverted recently. And when I say recently, I'm going back into the 2010s. Um,
I'm
some of them
recent.
during COVID, some of
Mm-hmm.
them, some before COVID, some go back as far as 2014, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not a recent deconvert.
I am
You are a
actually.
recent, you are a recent
Yes,
deconvert.
I
Okay.
was. I was in the faith for
Okay.
52 years.
Okay.
Have been out 3 years this month.
All right. So then let's get into you being into the faith for 52 years of your life.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
How did you get into the faith?
Okay. Well, if it's okay, I need to give a little bit of my family background
Okay.
to give an understanding
Yeah.
of that. Um, my family was not religious.
Hmm.
However, I did go to a Lutheran kindergarten, first and second grade
Okay.
school. And then we moved to another location in the city. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Mm.
And evidently there wasn't busing, or I don't know what the deal was, but I no longer went to that school.
Mm.
Of course, we no longer went to church. And during that period of time, my father's alcohol drinking habits
Mm.
started to increase,
Okay.
and life at home began to get
Mm.
pretty outrageous.
Mm.
Um, we went through many years of abuse,
Mm.
lack
Mm.
of no electricity,
Mm.
getting home and finding that we have to move because the rent wasn't paid. And
How many siblings?
actually, I'm the oldest. There were four of us.
Mm.
However, both of my two younger sisters are now deceased.
Mm.
One was Oz's mom,
Oh,
is
wow.
my baby sister, and my brother is still living.
Okay. I should say, for those who don't know, you said Oz's mom. For those of you who see Ozzy Oz or Oz, is sort of like a gateway into the online skeptic community. This is family. Oz is Kathy's nephew.
Yes.
So, okay, got you.
So, yeah, four of us, and there's several years between us.
Mm.
I'm the oldest, and my youngest sister, Sherry, was 10 and a half years younger. So it's quite a span of
Okay.
years. But anyway, because of the kinds of abuse and neglect and things that were going on,
Mm.
we moved frequently.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a different school almost every year.
Mm.
I was in three different schools in two different states just in the fifth grade alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm.
And as I came into my early teens, the abuse kind of changed,
Mm,
and I was very fearful.
mm,
And finally, I believe it was my sophomore year of high school, I finally went to an adult,
mm,
my the counselor at the school, and talked to her
mm,
about what was really going on in my home. And within a very short period of time, I was taken away from the home and put into foster care
mm, mm, mm.
for my protection.
Right.
So, in the series of foster homes that I lived in, there was, I think, the fourth or fifth one that I went into was
Mhm.
one that was owned and operated by a church.
I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
During all that was going on that you just talked about, the moving, the abuse, and all that, did anything from your kindergarten, Lutheran, there's ideas of God that were introduced, at least at that point, even though the family wasn't going to church. Did any of those ideas of God from when you were small kind of like reign upon your mind? Like, hey, isn't there a God that's supposed to be watching over me or something like that?
Yes, one thing that I can remember very well doing, especially from probably grades 7, 8, 9,
Mm,
was at night. I shared a bedroom with my sisters usually. And once they were asleep, if the moon was out,
mm,
I would sit on the floor and look at the moon
mm.
and talk to God and say why.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Of course, during the times at um, the Lutheran school,
Hmm.
we had to memorize the 23rd Psalm and
Mm,
the,
mm, mm.
you know,
Yeah.
all that basic stuff you had to
Mhm.
memorize. Plus, we went to chapel once a week as a
Mm.
class. And part of the agreement to go to the school was that your family went to church on Sundays.
Gotcha.
Did do that most of the time,
Mhm.
because during those years, those early years, my dad was okay. I
Okay.
mean, if he drank, it wasn't
Mm.
like exceedingly abundantly a bunch, you know.
Yeah.
But
Mm,
something happened after, I'd say,
mm,
mm, I was 8, maybe 7. I remember Brady one time. I I was in the living room with my brother and we were just playing, and it was a rainy day, so we couldn't go outside. And mom and dad were upstairs, and I heard them arguing,
mm,
and I heard my name mentioned.
mm,
And for some reason, from that point on, I felt like I was responsible
mm.
for their arguing,
Wow.
and that I had to be the perfect child so that I didn't give them any reason
Mm.
to argue or
Wow.
fight. And I mean, that's a heavy load
Oh
now
my
that I look
gosh.
back.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But yeah, seventh grade and on, I'd sit on the floor and look at the moon and,
Mm.
talk to
Gotcha.
the moon and say, God, where are you? And
Right. Mm.
why is life like it is? And
Okay.
um, yeah,
All right.
I did
So
do that.
yeah, I just was curious because I'm just thinking about the mind of a child, and when those ideas get introduced, they don't just evaporate, especially if you're going through
Oh, they
hard
don't.
things. I
Right,
would imagine there would be some kind of way to attempt to connect it back to what
right.
you had heard. And so, okay, so
Yeah,
you end up at
absolutely.
this foster situation where you said it's owned and operated by.
It was by a church,
Okay.
and it was a girls' group home.
Mm-hmm.
So I was one of several. There were a couple girls that were there who were delinquent.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for my protection. I
Mm-hmm.
was never the delinquent. I was the reader. I would escape by reading books,
Mm-hmm.
any kind of books. That was my safe
Mm-hmm.
place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still that way. I
Okay.
still read a lot, and my fantasies are through fiction,
Mm,
you know.
gotcha.
But anyway, part of the rules of the house were you had to attend church every
Mm,
time basically the doors were open.
okay.
And so Sunday morning, Sunday night,
Mm,
Thursday night, those were regular services. And then my foster dad was in choir, and sometimes I'd go with him just to listen. And, then there was Saturday night prayer meeting. And
Was
this
it of
was
any particular denomination or?
it was a non-denominational church.
Mhm.
However, the pastor had originally been an Assemblies of God, and he
Okay.
left Assemblies. So it was a charismatic church.
Mhm.
Um, I had been there maybe 2 weeks
Mhm.
and attended however many services that was in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And it was a Sunday night, and
Mhm.
there were people being baptized.
Mhm.
And this one young man, probably he was in his mid-20s, um, gave his testimony before baptism of how God saved his life
Mhm.
from running his car off the bridge.
Mhm.
He was high. He was intending to commit suicide, and it didn't happen.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, I remember this overwhelming feeling of love of
Mhm.
God, of the sanctuary turning like
Mhm.
bright white.
Mhm.
I started crying.
Mhm.
And I mean, I was sobbing,
Right.
crying. And I went down the stairs, and my
Mhm.
foster dad just happened to be near where I came out.
Mhm.
And he asked if I was okay. And I said, whatever he has, I want.
Mhm.
So we went
How
into
old were
the
you?
prayer. I was 16.
Okay.
We
Mm.
went into the prayer room, and
Mm.
I got saved.
Wow.
And I wanted to get baptized right away.
Now, let me just ask for those, there be some, I won't call them naysayers, the spiritual gatekeepers, as it were. We don't have to appease them so much, but I do think it's worth asking. When you say I got saved, the question would be, did what of the gospel did you understand in that getting saved moment?
Oh, that I was a sinner,
Mm-hmm.
that was wicked, and that
Mm.
Jesus died for my sins, and that he loved me. And because he loved me, he
Okay.
was going to, he took my place, he took
Mm.
my punishment, and he came so that I would be saved from my sinful nature.
Okay. Now, this is not
And
for the naysayers. This is for me. I'm wondering now about the psychology of it.
mhm.
You- What did it take to convince you at 16 that you were a sinner? Because I'm thinking much of your life experience up to that point is you being sinned against. People were sinning against you. But now here you're being told that you're the sinner. Did it take a lot to convince you that you were a sinner, or did you just say, "Yeah, I must be"? Like, what was that like, if you can recall?
What was going on in my mind is that I must have been a pretty awful person
Mm,
for my dad to behave the way he did, and for life to be the way he was.
mm,
I was
mm,
pretty
mm,
bad. And
mm,
I think one of the things that came to me that night was I wanted to feel the love.
mm-hmm.
That's what overwhelmed me
Gotcha.
when John shared his testimony, was the love of God that came across to
Mm,
me. And the fact that in this girls' home, I felt love.
okay.
It was a different
Yeah.
atmosphere than any of the other foster homes I'd been in.
Mm-hmm. Mm,
And I it just settled me.
mm,
It brought a settledness to me.
wow.
And the foster parents were very positive with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so if this is God's love, I want it.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
God's love is going to make me feel safe.
Mm,
And God's love is going to take care and fill
mm,
all those empty places in me.
wow.
So
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
what happened.
Okay.
And I was in hook, line, and sinker.
Mm.
I got to tell you this, I couldn't get baptized that night because they'd already started draining the baptismal tank.
Oh.
But they scheduled baptism for the next Sunday night.
Okay.
So the following Sunday morning,
Mm.
a little older gentleman gets up in the congregation and gives a message in tongues.
Mm,
Well, my background was Lutheran. I didn't know what tongues was, but I thought it was beautiful.
mm,
It really, was beautiful to me. And so that afternoon, I kind of went to one of my grandma's house for dinner, and I told her about it. Well,
mhm.
she was from the hills of Tennessee, if that tells you anything about
Okay.
Pentecostal kind of
You
woman
said
she
the
had
hills
been.
of Tennessee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Appalachia.
Hmm.
And she just put her hand on mine and she said, honey, if the Lord wants you to have that gift, you'll get it.
Hmm. Now, when you say he gave a message in tongues,
Yeah.
typically I think about tongues, but I think about somebody needing to translate or
Yeah.
interpret.
There was an
Okay,
interpretation.
got you.
Yeah.
But
I
you thought the
couldn't tell you
tongues by
what,
themselves, that was beautiful.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what was beautiful. I don't remember
Hmm.
the interpretation, but there was one.
Okay.
And so that night, I'm getting baptized.
Hmm.
And while I'm up in the baptismal tank and the pastor's there ready to do everything, he asked me to share something and I start sharing scripture.
Mm.
I didn't know where it came from, except
Mm.
maybe kindergarten, first and second grade.
Wow.
He puts his hand on my shoulder and he said, this young woman has a prophetic gift. And I'm going, now I'm going, what the hell is that? But I didn't say that, of course. So, I mean, it gets wilder. That night was so crazy. So
Mm.
after service was over, there were a group of um, hippies. This church was the only church in town that was letting the hippie group come in. This was
Okay.
the late 60s.
Okay.
So I had met a few of them and
Mm.
I had a real kindred spirit with them. And
Mm.
I went down to talk to them. The gentleman who spoke in tongues that morning
Mm.
came over to me, laid his hand on my arm, and the next thing I know, I'm flat out on the floor
Mm.
speaking in tongues.
What?
Yes, I'm not
What?
lying. No,
Okay.
God strike me. And I did not sleep that night. I spoke
Mm.
in tongues all night
Mm.
long. The next morning, when my foster parents,
Now, hold on, hold
you
on, hold on, hold on, because I got to do some sort of analysis or autopsy here.
find,
You grew up not seeing people falling out speaking in tongues,
never did, never did.
but your grandmother from the Appalachia,
Yeah, yeah.
she had experienced all that,
Oh, yeah.
but you were not
Mhm.
around that.
No, and she didn't tell me about that
Okay.
either.
So your only experience of that was being at this church for just a few weeks.
I,
And while you're at this church for just a few weeks, you're seeing that though. You're seeing people get hands laid on them, speaking in
mhm.
tongues, falling out.
I had never seen anybody fall out before, but I'd heard the tongues, had seen the laying
Okay.
on of hands.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to do my detective work here to figure out, unless this was a genuine experience of the Holy Spirit, where would the mindset that part of this experience is me falling out? How would that have got into your mind?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I know when the gentleman came up to me, I was just kind of overwhelmed that he would seek me out.
Mm. So you already had this kind of like a, not godlike, but sort of your admiration for whatever this spiritual gift that he had
Yeah.
him in a place of awe in your mind.
Yes,
And so the
exactly.
fact that this man would come over to you was already like, I think about fans when Michael Jackson was
Mm-hmm.
around. There are
Mm-hmm.
fans that are fainting and falling out because, yo, this is Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somewhere in your mind, this is that guy with that gift that made me say, hey, I'm just trying to put two and two together here.
I
That's all.
know. I never could figure it out myself,
Okay.
but it
Okay.
happened.
All right.
So that the next morning when the foster parents come in to, make sure I'm getting ready for school and
Mm.
I'm still speaking in tongues. And so my foster father called the pastor,
Wow.
put me on the phone, and
Mm.
Pastor Pano was his name, said, Kathy, I want you to say praise the Lord in English. So
Mm.
I did. And then he said, Gene, my foster dad, is going to bring you into my office and I'm going to explain to you what's happened to you.
Okay.
So I go into his office that late that morning, and
Mm-hmm.
he takes me into Corinthians and,
Mm-hmm.
begins to explain all
Mm.
about the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
Well, when I was in his office, he tells me that several of the hippies who were in the at the altar when I had all my craziness happen,
Mm.
had called him wondering what is going on. What is
Mm.
this stuff? So that was the beginning
Mm.
of him meeting with a group of 7 of us weekly
Mm-hmm.
to teach us about the Holy Spirit,
Mm.
to teach us more in depth about salvation.
Mm.
And out of that time together, we formed a coffee house ministry.
Yeah.
And it was called the Adam's Apple.
Mm.
And out of the Adam's Apple came Petra. You've heard
Mm.
of Petra, haven't
Yes,
you?
yes, Christian rock
And
band.
came a woman, Honey Tree, who does, she still plays music. She's still kind of a Joan Collins kind of
Okay.
guitar type thing. She came out of that. I mean, we had a powerful ministry to hippies.
Mm.
And the only church in town that would receive was this church I was a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And we first met in the
Mm.
on the landing, which was an historical part of downtown Fort Wayne. We didn't fit in there,
Mm-hmm.
but we had the opportunity to get, somebody gave us this building for $1 a month, and
Mm.
people from all over contributed things so that we could revamp it. And we
Mm-hmm.
never advertised, but
Mm.
people from all over came in.
Mm.
And we just drew young people.
Now, did
Just,
any of those other hippies end up uh experiencing the charismatic gifts that
oh
you?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we would have Bible studies at the
Mm.
coffee house. And then once a week we would carpool
Mm-hmm.
and take everybody to the church
Mm-hmm.
for a meeting or for prayer meeting or
Mm.
something. And over the years, the Adam's Apple lasted 10 years
Mm-hmm.
in, I think, 3 different locations,
Mm.
and wound up having people ministering out all over the world
Wow.
out of that ministry that I got to be part of.
It makes me think of
In
like Chuck Smith and Calvary Chapel.
Well, exactly, that's what was happening at the time.
Okay.
And part of when the pastor introduced the idea of a coffee house type ministry,
Mm.
he had been in contact with Chuck Smith,
Okay.
and the name of our church was Calvary Temple,
Mm.
and Chuck Smith was Calvary Chapel,
Right.
and they had something in common.
Okay.
And so after hearing about what the success was on the West Coast,
Mm.
he just presented that to us, and we would meet weekly and pray and plan and pray and plan and pray and
Mm.
plan. And that was quite a
Mm.
experience. And here I was the youngest
Mm.
on the board,
Mm.
and it was just a fascinating
Yeah.
experience, to see. Most of the kids that came in were so disgruntled with life
Mm-hmm.
and unhappy at home,
Mm.
and those kinds of things, that they needed love and they
Mm-hmm.
needed acceptance. And
Mm.
several quit drugs, and
Mm.
eventually the pastor wound up opening a Bible school.
Mm.
His church went from about 350 to building a new church that facilitated almost 3,000.
Wow.
And it was because of the hippies.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
amazing time. It really was.
So I'm just imagining here you are 16, 17, 18 while all this is going on. You graduate
Mhm.
high school. Do you think about college, or are you thinking about ministry? What's your goal at that point?
Well, College wasn't anything that was ever mentioned in my family, and
Okay.
historically, we really didn't have anybody. Now I look back with great regret, of
Mm,
course. I met someone through the coffee house ministry and wound up getting married too young,
mm,
thinking that's God's call in my life
mhm,
was to be a good wife.
mm.
And so I was almost 19 when I got married.
Wow.
Yeah, much too young. And he was a young convert, but not
Mm,
sold out. And that marriage lasted 12 years, but
mm,
they were years that were very similar to my
mm.
parents.
Wow.
When there's not some kind of intervention,
Mhm, mm.
to really get through the psychological trauma, you're going to repeat
Yeah.
what you lived, you
Mm,
know? And sad to say, all the prayers in the world didn't change
mm.
things.
Wow.
I prayed lots,
Mm,
and went for counseling. The first
mhm,
time I went to pastor, because I had been abused by my husband,
mm.
I left that office feeling like it was my fault.
Jeez.
Yeah. So
Mm,
I
mm,
I
mm,
wound up being caught up in that cycle that I had come out of,
mm, mm,
not
mm.
realizing that's exactly what I had done.
Wow.
So after 12 years, I we were divorced,
Mm,
and he actually filed for it, but I didn't fight it.
mm,
I knew I had by then I had two children, and it was hard, but I knew that was the best thing.
mhm.
We're at peace when he wasn't there,
Got you.
you know.
Mm,
Because of his job, we wound up on the East Coast.
mm,
And immediately I got involved in a church.
mhm,
I had been in and out of church during that time of my first marriage, but mostly out because he got to where he wouldn't allow me to go to
mm.
church. Yeah.
Was your relationship, as far as you could understand it at the time, was your relationship with God suffering because of your relationship with him, and you're not being able to go to church as frequently as you want to, or did it make you feel closer to God, or how would you explain your spiritual vitality during all of this?
I think after a few years of it, it got to where there really wasn't much of a relationship as far as from my end,
Mm-hmm.
because I kind of felt abandoned,
Mm,
you know. And that abandonment issue was an issue from
yeah.
my past,
Mm-hmm.
you know. The Not just because of my dad's drinking, but during the whole time that I was in foster care for 3 years, I think it was,
Mm,
I never heard from my family.
mm,
So that
yeah.
was a abandonment thing
Yeah.
too. So I felt like, God, what have I done?
Mm,
You know. And then I
mm,
went through a phase of thinking, well, if you can't beat them, join them.
mm,
So I would go to parties with him and stuff, and I'd
mm,
feel awful
mm.
doing that, you know.
So even in your abandonment issues with God, it wasn't like, God, what's wrong with you? You were thinking, Kathy, what's wrong with me?
Right.
Wow.
I always put it on myself.
Mm, mm,
um anyway,
yeah.
I mean, lots of stories,
Mm,
lots of stuff happened, lots of trying to reach out to God in different ways, and
mm,
was a part of, I think, our deep reconnect started when um, my ex went to AA and I became a part of Al Anon. And that was a very um, spiritually centered group that I was in
mm.
anyway. And that kind of started my rebooting,
Okay.
of my relationship with the Lord. But we moved to just outside of Norfolk, Virginia, and I found a little church that I went to that was pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was not a direct plant of the IBLP churches,
IBLP was
Bill Gothard,
okay. Yeah. Oh wow. Okay.
but they followed a lot of his
Mm-hmm.
principles and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I think my husband didn't go at all, but my daughters and I attended
Mm-hmm.
pretty frequently. And it was within a short period of time that he left us.
Okay.
And so the church
Mm.
took us in. Actually, one family in that church had a huge house with like 7 bedrooms.
Mm.
So my girls and I moved in with them
Mm.
for about a year or so. That church took us in and helped us tremendously for me to get on my feet.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we went through the divorce and everything.
Mm.
But one of the elders was a vice president at Pat Robertson's ministry, Christian Broadcasting Network.
Okay.
And so he helped me get a job there.
Mm. Well, you said
And
At Trinity Broadcasting Network?
no, at Christian Broadcasting
Christian
Network.
Broadcasting Network.
Yeah, it was Pat Robertson's ministry.
Okay.
So I started there in a department that was brand new. It was called teleministry.
Mm.
And what we did was we called out to partners to wish them God's blessings directly from Pat and, you know, to encourage them in their faith. And it always ended with something with, you know, maybe increasing their pledge or whatever. And within a
So not
year,
telemarketing, teleministry.
that's what it was called, teleministry.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, I'll tell you, when I first went to work at CBN,
Mm.
I thought I was going to be working in a little corner of heaven.
Mm.
You know, it had several hundred people that were employed there. And then Christian CBNU was the university. It's now called Regent.
Mm.
And I mean, it was a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know, this is just going to be heaven on earth. And I'll tell you, by the end of my first day, my bubbles were so burst.
First day.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, wherever there are people, you know, there are issues.
Mm-hmm.
But was a fortunate thing for me was that through some of the programs that they did offer to their employees, I did some different kinds of testing, like you would do for job testing and stuff. And I wound up with a new job as an administrative assistant. And my career was really growing. I was doing well, and I loved it. I was challenged. The thing that kind of saddened me was that all of the calls were scripted and timed, and you were given cards of what was the scriptures to use for encouragement, use these scriptures for, you know, this problem and these scriptures for that problem. And it was a business.
This is telemarketing.
Yeah, it was telemarketing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, the sweet little old ladies who would think that, you know, Pat told me to call her, you know, I mean, it was, yeah.
How did you feel about it while you were there? Did you feel like you were doing God's work, or did you see something a little amiss there?
I had a little bit of discomfort, but it was a job, and I had 2 kids to take care of. Okay. And, you know, I was a part of, you know, a church, and, you know, was still doing my morning Bible studies. And I mean, that was something I was always committed to, was my morning time with the Lord, and my Bible study and prayer time and all of that. I get up before everybody else and make sure I started my day well, you know. I think one of the things that really surprised me, and I was probably kind of naive, I mean, even though I lived a life that was full of traumas, I was still naive. You
Mm.
know, you wind up being, I didn't have a lot of friends because I was afraid to let
Mm.
people know what my home life was like.
Wow.
So you're secluded,
Mm.
and you just automatically do that. So, and
Mm. Mm.
probably reading fiction didn't help in my naivety,
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there were people who worked at CBN who were adulterers and homosexuals. And, I mean, I'm sure Pat didn't know, but he had by then thousands of employees,
Mm-hmm.
and people were people,
Mm.
you know, and they were living one life when they were working
Mm.
and doing their real life on the outside,
Mm.
and when I started catching wind of some of the things, it was
Mm.
real disappointing.
Because you're trying to
Um,
live out your faith.
oh man, was I?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, oh, I was the faithful. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was ingrained in me from the time I was a child, is you've got to be the best at whatever you do.
Mm.
And so on my job, in my faith,
Mm-hmm.
I got involved in
Mm.
ministry outside of church. I got
Mm-hmm.
involved in Women's Aglow,
Mm.
which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
No.
it was a parachurch
Mm-hmm.
um, organization that back then that was worldwide, and I got involved in that, and I got involved in a Christian weight loss group that was
Mm.
international. I mean,
Mm.
I got involved in stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Always working for my Lord.
Mm. Mm.
And I think let me backtrack just a little. In the kind of theology that I was brought up in, have you heard of Finis Dake and
Mm.
Schofield Bible?
Schofield, yeah. My first Bible was a Schofield study Bible.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, yes. Well, that was very much part of what I mean, that was the first Bible that you get at the church I came out of, was Schofield or Dake.
Mm.
Finis Dake was a dispensationalist,
Mm.
and I can remember going to classes for,
Mm.
learning and understanding from his book called God's Plan for Man.
Mm.
So besides having the charismatic stuff, there was the dispensational stuff. And in the
Mm.
hippie stuff, it was not
Mm.
preached hell, but the love of God.
Okay.
I don't remember hearing
Mm.
much on hell throughout all of my Christian life.
Okay.
I remember more
Mm.
focus on the love of God.
Got you.
And so that's what I needed.
Okay.
I thought
Mm-hmm.
was, love. Um, while working at CBN
Mm-hmm.
is when I met my second husband, who was a student. He already had his MDiv
Mm-hmm.
from a college that was, it wasn't Wesleyan, but it leaned Wesleyan
Okay. And
from that.
MDiv is Master of Divinity. It's
Right,
a master's level degree from a Christian seminary of some kind.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, he had his Asbury, and
Mm-hmm.
then wanted to experience something in the charismatic type teaching and experience. So came to CBNU. He had already pastored
Mm.
denominational churches and had been through a divorce himself. And I just was smitten
Mm.
that he came to work in the department where I worked in teleministry during a period of time. Part of my job, we were growing so fast and personnel couldn't keep up with everything.
Mm.
So part of my job became calling all the references.
Mm.
So I called his references, which I thought was interesting. But we eventually met and started dating, and part of me was just enamored with the fact that a pastor would be interested in me. Little old me, you know, that lack of self-esteem kind of thing, even though in my career I was really growing, and they had talked to me about going to college, and you know, I had attended some classes, but I never got my degree. So I kind of set it all aside and wound up getting married for the second time, which lasted 30 years. And it was and continues to be the biggest mistake of my life.
Wow. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So we went to Georgia to pastor a small church there that was growing, and they wanted him, because of his previous experience, to try to get things going. And it was a non-denominational church. It was very small. We were in the middle of a pine tree forest. And that was my first real experience, of course, as a pastor's wife, of the expectations of a pastor's wife. And I didn't play the piano. I cannot sing. My sister Sherry got that gift. I didn't. And, you know, but I could teach a mean Bible study. And so I started teaching Bible studies, and that was my first real introduction to see how much, even though it was on a small scale, people do not read their Bible. People go to hear the pastor, so he will feed them for the week. And they can claim that they've, you know, done their duty, basically, but they don't know anything. And we didn't, there were some very serious allegations against my husband, and so we didn't stay at that church very long. We moved from there back to Indiana, and again got involved in ministry. And we've moved a lot. Honestly, in my lifetime, I have moved over 60 times.
Yikes.
Yeah, I wrote a list a while ago of all the places I could remember, starting from when Mama told me where we lived, you know, all the way up. And some were because of my dad, some were because of military, some were because, well, God was telling us it was time to go somewhere else. And it wasn't that at all. But during my second marriage, especially after we got back to Indiana, I got real involved in ministry and teaching and studying.
And let me just ask too, through all of because the story is getting so, like, I'm seeing a movie right now. But through all of this, being a pastor's wife, seeing the I guess the hurdles that presents, and then moving again and all that, the accusations against your husband as a pastor and going back to Indianapolis, in all of that, are you feeling closer to God, or are you feeling distance from God? Like, what's happening in all of that?
I believe I was crying out more to God to show himself to be true to me. But knowing that I had invested so much of my life into God, and so afraid of not having God in my life, that I just kept on trucking.
And as you're crying out, waiting, are you still thinking? Because if God doesn't respond or respond favorably, the issue is still with Kathy, not with God.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
So I had to try harder and do more.
Okay.
And I can tell you from, we wound up getting involved we started churches besides the one in Georgia. We started churches in Indiana. We worked in ministries. I worked in ministries besides CBN. Together we worked with, the ministry was called Cleansing Stream. It was out of Jack Hayford's church. Are you familiar with Jack Hayford?
Yeah.
Okay. We were involved in that for 9 years, and that was a type of deliverance ministry. And we went from being participants to anointers, where, it was, Pastor Jack had said that he found there was repetition in people who came in for counseling. It was either issues with sex, money, or demons, And so in the courses of training that we went through, it was dealing with these issues, and it was being trained not so much as a counselor, but we would have these big retreats, and at the retreats there would be times of prayer and deliverance. And so we were involved in that for 9 years.
And believing that you're actually seeing people get delivered.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any of those people that you're seeing get delivered end up needing to be delivered again, or did it seem like it worked?
I would say probably 99% needed it again. Because it's not, you and I both know that praying away something isn't going to change what's up here.
Yeah.
So as I was brought up in the Christian faith, I was taught, and it was reconfirmed through Cleansing Stream especially, that man was spirit, soul, and body. And throughout my Christian life, you were never encouraged to have any involvement with anybody who did anything with your mind.
So counseling, therapy, all that is out.
Unless it's Christian counseling.
Wow.
Or Christian therapy. It was just forbidden. And some of the circles, some of the churches you don't take medication for those kinds of things either.
Okay.
That was forbidden. You just needed to pray more. You just needed hands laid on you, and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Which, I mean, I believe that. I totally believed all of that. I believe that that the spiritual body, the spiritual part of our body really was, how was it I heard it? Oh, we were a spirit living in a body.
Right.
And so the spirit reigned and had control. And it after a while, there were just so many things that happened through the 30 years. So many spiritual things, spiritual disappointments, many spiritual disappointments, many times that I was an intercessor, so usually my watch hour time was 3 o'clock in the morning. I would wake up and pray for an hour or more. And I would.
So hold on, just for somebody who's watching, an intercessor is somebody who prays on behalf of others.
Exactly.
To stop spiritual things, stop negative things from happening, or for God to help in situations.
Right.
You would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. When you say you were an intercessor, are you saying you were appointed as one, or you just took that upon yourself to be one, or how did you become an intercessor?
I felt I was appointed.
Okay.
I felt that was one of my callings.
Appointed by God, not by Jack Hayford or some other, but God was calling you to do that.
God was calling me.
Mm.
to be an intercessor.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, you wake up
Mm-hmm.
and
I
pray
did
for
that.
other people.
Mm-hmm. I did that for, a couple of years for sure. Sometimes it would be a dream
Mm.
and someone in the dream needed it,
Mm.
or it would just be, a lot of times it was somebody I did not know.
Mm.
A name or a face would
Mm.
come to me, and
Mm.
I would intercede on their behalf. And
Wow.
usually the intercession was prayed in tongues
Mm.
because I didn't know the circumstances, but
Wow.
God did. So if I'm
Wow.
praying in
Wow.
tongues,
Wow. Look
when
at
you're,
how this makes you a victim of your own imagination. Like,
oh yeah,
how many
yeah,
intrusive thoughts would invade the mind of a person who's thinking it's their job to intercede for others?
hmm,
And your mind can, names, millions of names, maybe not millions, thousands of names.
right,
A name can enter your mind just through your own mind's processes, and you're going to interpret that as, oh, God must want me to pray for Kevin. And
right,
now you're going to just wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and pray for an hour in tongues for
hmm,
Kevin because you believe that that's
hmm,
your, wow,
hmm.
wow. Yeah, okay.
A lot of at least the kind of intercessors that I associated with,
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of praying in tongues because that was a
Mm.
language. What we were taught was it was a language that only God understood and the devil couldn't interpret it. And so,
That
yeah,
always
boy,
that always makes, like, what's the big, like, what's going to happen if Satan can understand your prayer? Is he strong enough to, like, to do something that God can't undo at that point? Like, what does it matter whether he understands your prayer or not?
no, that's it.
Mm.
It's like you have this secret with God, and of course that part of it is not scriptural.
Mm.
There's nowhere in the Bible does it
Right,
say that,
right.
Satan has no
He can't interpret
understanding.
your prayers. Yeah.
Yeah, right, right.
Mm.
Um, oh, let's see. I was just jotting notes down of,
Mm.
I'm going to be 71 next month. I've lived a lot of years
Mm.
and experienced a lot
Yeah.
of stuff in the 52 years as a Christian. And I would say, except for the first marriage when there was, complications, I was a faithful studying my Bible, and I
Mm.
didn't just read it, I
Mm.
studied it.
Mm.
With my second husband being having an MDiv,
Mm-hmm.
I did learn more on how to use some of the tools
Mm-hmm.
available, and I learned
Mm.
beyond the Strong's Concordance, um,
Mm.
commentaries,
Mm-hmm.
and um, who was it? Matthew Henry was a favorite.
I remember Matthew
Yeah,
Henry.
right. And
Mm.
a lexicon. I learned to
Mm-hmm.
use a lexicon, and then he had 10 years of Greek.
Mm.
And so I knew to pick his brain
Mm-hmm.
to to explain more in depth. I knew that you don't just go to the concordance
Gotcha.
and get here's the word, here's what it means, and
Mm-hmm.
here's how you apply it.
Mm.
And when I started teaching more and more women's Bible studies, I was teaching not from a book,
Mm.
but from the Bible itself.
Mm.
I refused to do a Bible study on
Mm.
anything but the Bible.
Mm.
And it just didn't make sense to me. These people didn't know their Bible. They didn't
Okay.
know, you know, they I remember how
Mm.
I felt when I found that all of the Psalms weren't written by David.
Mm.
And so the majority of the people that I taught were very ignorant as
Mm.
far as things of the Bible, but oh, buddy, could they pray in tongues? I mean, it was just,
Mm.
not to make fun because I was there.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
a part of it. It was very real.
yeah.
And we lived in this insulated little world.
Mm.
And we didn't associate with people outside of our world
Mm.
because then we would be worldly.
Well, let's get to it because you said you said I was there,
Right.
but you're no longer there.
No, I'm not.
So how did it begin to come apart for you then?
Okay. 7 years ago, my biological father died,
Mm.
and he lived in another state. We had been estranged for many, many years.
Mm.
I received a call that I had to come out to Missouri and take care of his estate because I was the nearest living relative.
Mm.
My brother and my Sherry, my youngest sister, was still living then. My sister Cindy had already passed.
Mm.
So we went out there together, and we sort of made a pact that we were going to be searching for truth.
Mm.
And of course, at that time, truth was about our father.
Mm-hmm.
We had heard all kinds of stories about him. And so that mission to know the truth about him
Mm.
opened my eyes. I can't speak for anybody else, but opened my eyes to a lot. And it sent me into very serious depression
Mm.
because as we had to sort through everything of his, you relive your childhood.
Mm.
And it was very, very hard.
Mm.
I had days I couldn't get out of bed.
Mm.
It was very dark. And I felt like, God, why did you let that happen?
Mm-hmm.
Where were you when all of that bad stuff happened? Not just to me, but to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And where are you now?
Mm.
During that time, I somehow heard about a book that Francis Chan had written about the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it. And I thought, here's somebody who's questioning
Mm-hmm.
things about the church and
Mm.
how he left his mega church, but he started like small group stuff
Mm-hmm.
instead,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing that the mega church wasn't God's answer. And I knew where I was going at the time was not a mega church. It was a pretty good sized church, but
Mm.
I live in a small community, so we don't have mega churches here. But then I read
Mm.
pagan pagan Christianity,
Mm.
which was by, what was his name? I've got it written down. Frank Viola.
Okay.
And even though he is still a Christian,
Mm.
he was bringing out so many things that are of paganism, sort of, that were happening in the churches.
Mm.
And there was again another, and it felt right to me. It felt right that the questioning was happening. And it was like, oh, I can question.
So you read these before you guys went down to sort your father's things out?
No, it was during the process.
During the process. Okay, I got you.
During the process of that. And then I had, during one of my darker days, a woman called who was a prayer warrior or intercessor, whatever you want to call her at the time. And I was really dark, and I needed a shoulder. I needed somebody. And very flippantly, I'm so sorry, Kathy, but Jesus is just going to make it all better. And I honestly have never talked to her again since then. That was also the year that I went through my divorce after 30 years. And the way a former pastor's wife, who's now divorced because I left him, was I was ostracized. And no matter that I had
Mm.
if you want to say grounds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was just no way I could continue in that relationship. And I just started seeing how I had wasted
Mm.
my life.
Mm.
I felt like I had wasted my life. And then my nephew, Oz, I heard that he had a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started listening to him and some of the people that he had on. And I think I listened 2 or 3 times. And then I called him and said, hey, nephew, why don't I drive up to Fort Wayne and let's have lunch together?
So Oz had deconverted.
Yes.
And started a YouTube channel talking about his deconversion.
Right. Right.
Do you remember who some of the people he had on that you saw on his channel before you took that drive?
Yeah, he had Dr. Josh on.
Joshua Bowen. Okay.
Yeah, I love Dr. Josh.
Okay.
And he had I think the rest of them don't have channels now.
Gotcha.
But it was quite a few people, and just some good conversation, good questions, and
so
I
Francis, let me just try to get the timeline right. Francis Chan's book had opened you up to the idea of questioning how you do church. Right. That was okay.
Yes.
Frank Viola's book opened you up to the idea of questioning what the church is even doing, period.
Yes.
And so just the idea that you can question is making you more comfortable with it may not be what I always thought it was.
Right.
You've got your own issues that are making you ask God, where were you? Where were you then? And you said, where are you now? Can you speak a little bit? Because I want to get to the Oz, but can you speak a little bit to the where are you now question? I could get the where are you then. How, like, what was behind the where are you now? Because you're in ministry, you're an intercessor, but what's making you ask, where are you now?
The where are you now question started when my second ex-husband and I were no longer in ministry, and we were living in poverty, which we did the majority of the time that we were together. He had a son. I helped raise his 3 sons. And he had a son that had some drug issues. And we had spent a lot of money we didn't have. Things weren't changing as much as prayer was going on. And a fact in our marriage was that we had been married 30 years, but technically to live as husband and wife, we only lived that way for maybe 7.
Okay.
And there were things that were being more revealed to me that I was suspicious of, but didn't want to go there. And also, I had made a vow to God when I married this man. And you don't break your vows to God. I mean, I was very serious in that, especially after having been through a divorce prior. And even though I did not pursue the first divorce, as a Christian woman, you're there. It's just a part of things. You just put up with whatever has to be put up with, and self-denial is just part of it. I mean, I was working great jobs and made good money and wondering where it was all going. And, the money was pooled, yet we never had money. And I mean, just a lot of stuff. And I just started feeling like I was dying inside. I was just dying.
Gotcha.
There was no love. There was no comfort. There was nothing there between us. And when a decision was made to bail his son out of jail and bring him to live with us, and I was not asked.
Mm.
I was not included in the conversation at all.
Mm.
The decision was just made.
Mm-hmm.
And we were living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment.
Mm.
I thought, I can't do this anymore. I
Mm.
can't live
Mm.
with an alcoholic. I grew up with an alcoholic.
Mm.
I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And so I called my mom and stepdad and said, can I come home?
Mm.
And here I was in my 60s.
Wow. Wow.
Making that phone call saying,
Mm.
can I come home?
Mm.
I think one thing with my family, this is just, I should mention it earlier, is when I got saved during the Jesus movement and was in the foster care,
Mm-hmm.
I went back home for a season,
Mm-hmm.
and I led my family to the Lord.
Mm.
Everybody except my dad.
Mm.
And that was my goal was to go home and get daddy saved.
Mm.
Well, of course, that didn't happen.
Wow.
But everybody else in the family,
Mm.
or my boyfriend prayed with my brother,
Mm.
but my mom and my 2 sisters, I prayed the sinner's prayer with them and led them into getting into a church and everything, So I was the one that started it.
Mm.
And when I started questioning things, that bore heavy on me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that here I am, I led my family,
Mm.
and my family led their families.
Mm.
And I have a nephew who's a pastor,
Mm.
and I have a brother. My brother's a pastor,
Mm.
and
Wow.
my mom is still alive. She's 91, and she's still a believer. And so
Wow.
there's
Wow.
all of that
Yeah.
weight of,
Yeah.
man, if I make a decision,
Mm.
it's going to affect a lot of people.
Wow. Okay. Got you.
To answer your question,
Yeah.
kind of,
More
sort of.
than. Yeah. More. Yeah. So, okay. So
um,
you call Oz and you say, hey, nephew, how about I
yes,
come and we sit and talk?
so he calls it, we met for Atheist pizza. But, and he didn't know what I was up to. He kind of thought I might be being sent by his mom to, talk to me. Maybe Aunt Kathy can get him to, come
to the
back.
faith.
And, yeah. But I just knew I could feel safe asking questions.
Okay.
So we were in the pizza place for about an hour, and I just started asking some questions and asked him to explain what he went through and why he, books that he read and opinions that he listened to. And I left there somewhat enlightened, challenged, feeling like it was okay to ask more questions. And it's funny, Oz tells the story that when we went out into the parking lot, and when he went out into his car and sat down and said, what in the hell just happened? Because it was quite shocking that Aunt Kathy was asking questions, especially since I'm the one that
right. You started this whole thing in the family.
I started this whole thing. Yeah. And so I went home and started digging and thinking and listening to different podcasts that were on YouTube. And I just started rehashing what I believed and why did I believe what I believed.
Did you pray?
No.
Oh, interesting.
I kind of stopped praying then. But I hope I can explain this and how I mean it. I started thinking about the influencers of the faith. And Arminius, Calvin, Spurgeon, Wesley's, Matthew Henry, and I started looking up when were they alive, which was like 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, a long time ago. And still today, people rely on their opinions to formulate their beliefs. Even more so, I think, than the Bible itself.
Wow.
I'm a Calvinist, or I'm Arminian, or I'm, I follow Spurgeon's teachings, or I'm a Wesleyan buddy, and and so this may be weird, but I've been known to be called weird. But I got to thinking, what were the medical what's the word I want? What happened in medicine in the years that these people were popular? And I found, let me see. I wrote, I take notes. I'm a note taker.
Okay.
When Calvin was alive and Arminius, that was when they discovered that blood had a circulatory system. And I thought, I'm willing to let their influence affect me today spiritually, but there's no way that I would go back to what the medicine was like and science was like in the 1500s. Why am I allowing?
Wow.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why and Matthew Henry, he was from 1600s. The medical discovery was that there's bacteria.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this doesn't make sense. Plus, I started thinking, by this time I had started seeing a therapist. And I had actually started just before my divorce. And my therapist is not Christian. And so it's just interesting how all that came about. But she's just been wonderful to help me get my head together. But I just started thinking and realizing that I am not a spirit that lives in a body, that my mind is something that I can have some control over, that I can use the mind that God gave me to make some decisions that are going to affect all of me and others. And also, I started questioning I started going through Genesis. I started Genesis 1:1. Yeah. I'd read through the Bible several times and, over the 52 years. And I let the bad parts be overlooked and, the typical stuff that happens. But I started seeing things and I started allowing myself to question.
Yeah, that's how it happens.
where did Cain's wife come from? And one big one that helped throw me over the edge was when I read the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I believe it's tablet 11, 7 or 11, about the flood. And, it's like reading the flood story with Noah, except the names are changed to protect the innocent. And it just like, I started understanding more and more how much this was mythology, how much this was storytelling. And then I went into studying the Bible as a book, that this is a book. How did this become a book? How many different authors are in this book? How did it become canonization? What's the canonization process? Who are some of the people involved in the canonization process? Some of them were not good people. Some of them had lives that we today would be, I mean, it would be people that Christians would, put their heads down and not look at, because of lifestyles. And yet these were people who were allowed to be a part of the canonization process. I just started tearing things apart, really tearing things apart, until I thought, I just wept. I wept, and I grieved that I had lived my life to please this God that doesn't exist.
Wow.
To believe these stories, to see, to learn that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wasn't written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Right.
To learn that the letters of Paul, the ones that he really wrote, were written before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I started realizing that I was reading more of Paul's work than I was of Jesus. Why was Paul really the founder of Christianity and not Jesus? I mean, it was like all of a sudden, the more I asked, the more I was allowing myself to ask. And it just finally, I don't remember the date. I just remember it was April, and it was three years ago. I walked out of my bedroom and I said, that's it. And I felt a lifting. I honestly felt a lifting.
Praise him.
I know. And I kept, one of the mistakes, I think, as an early agnostic then, was I tried to undo 52 years in a year. I mean, I was cramming, reading, listening, writing. I mean, everything that I had believed, I was now trying to unlearn or relearn or see it more clearly.
Yeah.
And I really got myself into a mess. I mean, I got really stressed about it and overdid.
Okay.
Overdid. And it takes time to make change.
Yeah.
And then during that process, also my sister Sherry passed away. And I mean, that was really hard. That was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. And it led, of course, to a depression. And I have dealt with depression my whole life. So I kind of went backwards and a little bit, and just had to realize that I needed to give myself time.
Yeah.
I was doing a podcast. It was called The Vintage Explorer. And I really loved doing it. I did it on Oz's network. And it was just too much. It was too much to do that, to learn new things, to deal with my grief. And I was having some physical problems as well. And so I just backed off.
Okay.
And it has taken me until just recently
Mm.
to walk through my depression and work through that,
Mm-hmm.
to work with my doctors to
Mm-hmm.
get totally changed
Mm.
my eating and my diet and exercise and
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff. And I'm feeling like a new person.
Mm.
Um,
Congrats.
thank you. Just amazed at the difference that
Mm-hmm.
food is medicine. That's my
Mm.
new mantra.
Okay.
um,
Mm.
and, learning that it's okay to take care of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm at a new place.
Gotcha.
I'm not real sure what is next.
Mm-hmm.
I do know, as far as in my community, I have just very recently found a group of free thinkers.
Okay.
And so I've had some contact a little bit with them, but
Mm.
we're the leaders trying to pull together a time where we can actually meet together.
Mm-hmm.
And a goal is to start working as a volunteer in elementary schools to help with reading,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm an avid reader. I can't imagine
Mm-hmm.
anybody not being able to read.
Mm.
And if there's some way I can help someone to read, and I know the schools need volunteers, and so I'm kind of
Yeah.
preparing myself for that for the
Okay.
fall. Um, I don't know if I really want to do a podcast again.
Mm.
I gave away all my stuff. I
Mm.
had microphone and all that stuff, and I donated it to
Mm.
somebody on YouTube, and
Mm.
I'm just I'm finally at a healthy place,
Gotcha.
and it feels so darn good. And I know my brother and his wife think I'm going to hell,
Mm.
and other family members, but Mama, this is so sweet. Every week we go out for lunch or get a pedicure or
Mm.
something. And we've been doing this for over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, 2 weeks ago, she said, "What's an atheist?" And so I tried to explain to her
Mm.
what an atheist is. And
Mm-hmm.
she said, "Honey, we used to pray and talk about the Bible a whole lot
Mm.
when we were together, and we don't do that anymore. Can you tell
Mm.
me why?"
Mm.
And so I try to explain a little
Mm.
bit. I mean, she's still pretty sharp at 91, but
Mm-hmm.
and then she said, "There's a lot of stuff in the Bible I don't understand." She said, "A lot of that mean stuff and killing babies and all that
Mm.
stuff I don't agree with,
Mm.
but some of it I just put on the shelf because I like to pray."
Mm.
And she said, "You know what? I don't care what you believe.
Mm.
You're still my best friend."
Wow.
And I thought, oh, I wish that, I mean, I had been so worried about, I wasn't going to tell Mom anything,
Right. Right.
And so my two daughters
Mm.
deconverted before I did.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they've been
Mm.
wonderful. It's been good to kind of
What did you think
rebuild.
about their deconversion while you were still in?
I didn't really realize. I mean, I
Okay.
kind of sort of thought they had deconverted, but
Mm.
we hadn't really talked about it.
Gotcha.
And then
Mm-hmm.
after I deconverted, we did. And then actually, when I
Hmm.
was with Oz, he had the three of us on do a show.
Oh, wow.
We recorded a show with each of us,
Mm-hmm.
and then with all three of us together.
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, it was rough because,
Mm.
I mean, I made a lot of mistakes as a mom, as
Mm.
far as, you know, God telling us to do this and God telling us to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
why can't God make up his mind, Mom? And,
Mm. Mm. Wow.
and living in poverty and,
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm.
that. I mean, they went through a lot, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of regrets with
Mm.
that, but we're communicating. We're doing well. They're doing well. They're both professional women and
Okay.
have great careers, and
Mm.
I'm very proud of them. And
Mm.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's been a long, hard road.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me was being very humbled
Hmm.
when I deconverted. I thought I knew so much,
Hmm.
and I thought I was a good Bible teacher, and
Hmm.
I just thought I knew so much.
Hmm.
And when I made the decision to leave
Hmm.
and I started educating myself, I was very, very, and still very
Hmm.
humbled of what I
Hmm.
didn't know.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the folks that are speaking out,
Yeah.
the folks that are, you know, sharing
Hmm.
what they've been through. And then also one thing I love about your programs are that I'm learning to have how to have discourse,
Hmm.
how to have conversations, you know, how to discuss things and
Hmm.
listen to the other side. And um, of course, y'all use words that I need a dictionary for.
That's Jay
that
Witt.
that's yeah, that's you know, I'm just a simple, humble
I'm gonna
girl.
blame him and Al for that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's I mean, if it wasn't that I was hungry for knowledge, I think that could probably turn some people away,
Mm,
honestly, because it's so deep. You know,
hmm.
when you've got 95% of
Mm,
your church folks don't even open their Bible,
yeah.
let alone to understand what um, some of the
Hmm.
teachings are of the Bible, or even what theology or epistemology or
Yeah.
apologetics or,
Hmm.
you know, existentialism, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Nobody,
Yeah.
you know, Joe Blow on the pew does not know
Hmm.
what any of that is.
Mm.
So, um,
Yeah, I try to take
but
that into account sometimes because I
well,
know.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, and I've learned a lot in the last 3 years,
Mm,
but um, by listening, by hearing
hmm.
words, and I've always loved that research and that
Hmm.
get the dictionary out, learn
Yeah.
something new, and I do appreciate that. But
So
yeah,
you categorized yourself a minute ago as agnostic.
I think I'm an agnostic atheist.
Okay.
I do not know a
Hmm.
100% that there is no God.
Hmm.
I don't believe there is, but
Hmm.
who knows?
Yeah.
You know, so I can't freely say I'm 100% atheist because I don't think any of us know.
Right.
You know, I just know I do not believe in the
Hmm.
God of the Bible.
Gotcha.
That's 100%.
You can
That's
rule that
not
one out. And
absolutely
it's not some animus or yeah, see, they hate the Bible of the God of the Bible. That must mean it's real.
no,
It's not a particular animus, but you believe you have reasons why you could rule that particular God out.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't, you know, I don't hate people
Mm,
who still go to church, and I'm, um, I've lost most of my friends.
mm,
Like, I think I've got one good friend left who
mm,
will talk to me.
mm,
And family, I have my mom and my daughters.
mm.
That's,
The story you told of your mom almost reminds me of the video that you sent me, Held Together.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like just to have your
yeah,
mom come and say, "Hey, I'm still rocking with you regardless."
right.
That's just a special thing.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. You know, I know Mama loves me,
Hmm.
and she accepts me just the way I am and just how I am. And we've,
Mm,
you know, we've worked through some real stuff
hmm.
in our relationship,
Yeah.
because of our past
Hmm.
together, and
Mm,
um, you know, years of not talking and then building
hmm.
a new relationship. And I love her dearly,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
I'm glad she's on my side no matter what. And I don't even want to call it sides really,
Yeah, I
because
got you.
I just,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm still me. I'm
Hmm.
still,
Yeah.
I still do the same things I used to do as far as, my crafts and my reading and,
Right.
stuff. I just don't believe the same way I used
Yeah.
to. And I think it's
Mm.
provable.
Mm. You just answered one of my last questions for you, which was going to be what's changed? What's different? Like you said, you're still you. You still like the things that you used to like. You still do the things you used to do. You just don't believe that anymore.
Right.
Do you miss any of it at all?
I think the only thing I miss
Mm.
is the fellowship.
Yeah. Community.
I miss the feeling of community,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been lonely,
Mm.
and I mean, of course, some of that happens as you age.
Mm-hmm.
I've lost several of my friends to death,
Mm.
and that is a real reality. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I do miss that
Mm.
more than anything, and I love having the YouTube and all,
Mm-hmm.
but still, to me, a
Yeah.
friend is somebody I can reach out and hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the virtual stuff
Yeah.
it's
But I wonder if that's the
nice.
way of the world and not just the fact that you've deconverted and lost a spiritual community. Because
Oh,
think
right,
about post-COVID, even people who are of the faith, a lot of them are seeing their loved ones and their friends online as opposed to in person.
right.
So I wonder what technology and just life has done to make it more virtual than actual.
To me, there's a sadness in that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you only really know a person when you're skin to skin, face to
Gotcha.
face.
Mm-hmm.
There's just
Yeah.
something about that, and
Yeah.
but maybe part of that's because that's how I was raised.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
You know,
it's like I said, it's the way of the world. The world was one way. That's how
yeah.
we knew each other. And so for those of
Hmm.
us who remember what it was like before, we can compare what it's like now to what it was like before. I have one last
Hmm.
question I think might be burning for some people because it's
Okay,
kind of burning for me.
sure.
So now 3 years deconverted,
Hmm.
you look back, like one of the things that I do, I think people appreciate about Ichabod is I try to look back at my Christian experience through fresh eyes. How do I see those experiences now? So I'm very curious. What do you say about the early part of your testimony? What do you say about your speaking in tongues and your, that experience where you fell out when the guy laid his hand on you? How do you explain that to yourself now, believing what you believe about spiritual things and all that?
I think it is a lot of emotion
Mm,
involved.
mm,
Um, I think that it's easy to put a spiritual tag
mm-hmm,
on something that's really related to the flesh
mm-hmm,
or to the mind.
mm-hmm,
And what I perceived as love and loving
mm-hmm,
was not really that.
mm-hmm.
It was not because of spiritual stuff.
Gotcha.
um I think you're right in that the elderly gentleman,
Mm-hmm,
that I was in awe of him,
mm-hmm,
that he had a connection with God, and that he would come to me
mm-hmm,
and touch me, pick me out,
mm-hmm.
was just an
Yeah.
awesome thing, and
Mm-hmm,
overpowering
mm-hmm.
in that way.
Truly overwhelming. We use the word
It
overwhelming
was.
a lot, but we don't really
Hmm.
mean overwhelming like the word means. And you were
Yeah,
overwhelmed at that moment.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And now looking back and seeing
Mm,
how the wounded and hurting person that I was
mm,
inside,
mm.
and having that experience, I mean, I understand more
Yeah.
what happened,
Mm-hmm.
why it happened. And
Yeah.
I see more of the wanting to please others
Mm-hmm.
above myself
Mm.
as part of a coping mechanism
Wow.
for me.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, and I think for people who come out of similar traumas,
Mm-hmm.
you want to do anything you can to avoid the experience of trauma or anything related to it.
Yeah.
So you'll go out of your way.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I wanted to believe
Mm-hmm.
there was a God in heaven who would make everything
Mm.
good.
Mm.
I
Wow.
wanted that so much.
Yeah. Mm.
And I was willing to keep believing, keep hoping, keep praying. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's why I stayed in one marriage for 12 years and the other
Mm.
for 30.
Mm.
It was like that
Yeah.
hope eternal. And it's like at some point you got
Right.
to realize,
Mm.
uh-uh.
Well, you just mentioned eternal. So it brings up another question. What do you do with thoughts of the afterlife, death?
I don't, I mean, death is death. It's
Mm.
over.
Okay.
I don't see any afterlife at all.
Okay. That doesn't
I
scare
don't,
you. Doesn't
no,
no fear of hell. Even as a believer, you said
no,
that wasn't a big thing, but you don't. What if you're
no.
wrong? Any of that ever plague you?
It hasn't so far.
Okay, I don't want to put
It's
it in your mind.
no, it's all your fault. No, it's like I believe
Mm.
that there's even some scripture that says something to the effect of, from not this, not dust to dust, but
Mm.
basically that's what it's saying.
Yeah.
And that
Ecclesiastes says, once it's over, it's over. Like we don't. Yeah, it's
exactly,
just.
exactly. I think all of the heaven and hell thing is,
Mm.
just man-made,
Mm.
and wanting to
Mm.
live on and hoping that the next life is better.
Yeah.
And I think, now I'm learning more and more the importance of personal responsibility.
Mm.
You can't blame it on God, you can't blame it on the devil, it's
Mm.
you.
Yeah.
And I that's something that's very lacking
Mm-hmm.
in the Christian church, is making people to be responsible for their choices
Mm.
and their actions. I mean,
Yeah.
it can easily be forgiven if you confess your sin and, somebody prays over you or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of it
Mm.
being resolved, it's covered up.
Wow.
And I
Mm.
mean, believe me, with being involved in the different ministries that I was,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing things that happen behind the scenes,
Mm.
I mean, to call some church and ministry stuff a racket,
Mm.
I mean, is that a little rough?
Mm.
um, I've seen too many people hurt
Mm.
because of the things that go on behind the scenes.
Wow.
Abuse is, child abuse covered up,
Mm.
and, people being protected because of, I mean, we actually left a church because 5 people in the top echelon, including the pastor, went through divorce within a 2-year period of time, and it was never
Mm.
discussed in the church.
Mm.
Never. And it was like, something's not right if the top folks are
Mm.
going through this and they're not willing to talk about this,
Wow.
and top leaders in, especially when I was at CBN, who were
Mm.
going cross country on business with funny business going on, or pastors who would go on ministry trips by themselves, and
Mm.
yeah.
Wow. Mm.
Brother,
Mm. Mm.
it's really, really sad, some of
Yeah. Mm.
the exploitation of Christ.
Mm. Wow.
if I mean, I could probably rattle on forever, but I
Well,
made a list.
I'm gonna say you've got a book on your hands, like the life that you've
Well,
lived. You've got a book and maybe a movie deal on your
hey,
hands.
I, I had a guy prophesy over me in church one time that I had a book that was going to bring healing.
I bet he didn't think it would be all this.
No, probably not. I thought, well, I do like to write. I do write. I do. That's one of my little things is I've got short stories and things I've written, never published, but some are for kids. Some are just thoughts that come to my mind. And, I've got a super powered little squirrel with a magical tail. And, I just have an imagination. But yeah, I'd say I even feel freer in tapping into my imagination now than
there you go.
than I ever did. So
there you go.
And I really love you. I think you're one of my sons in another life.
Here we go.
I just, I don't know why I linked up with you from the beginning. I mean, I'm the one that told Oz about your deconversion. And I thought, I don't know what this thing is because I never listened to your music or anything, honestly. But I mean, I knew who you were, but it was like, there's just something there. I think you're stuck with me.
Thank you. Because I remember early on when you chimed in, I said, yo, I got to knock Kathy too. But no, just your support and the way you always are just encouraging. It means a lot. It means a lot because I didn't know, you saw Oz and you saw Josh Bowen on this program and you knew that I didn't know any of that existed when I was going through my process. And so it was lonely. It was dark. Scary even. Even though I was determined to find my way out, I didn't know what was going to be on the other side. So to come out on the other side and to have people like you and people like Oz and Jenna and people that began to reach out, Shannon Q, I was like, wow, there's really people out here. So I thank you and I celebrate you, congratulate you for finding your way out. It's almost like this thing is a maze and many of us don't make it out. But you made it out.
Yeah. And, you said a word that I think a lot of people don't want to admit is that there is fear involved in getting out. There is fear of the unknown. And a fear of, well, who will I be? When your identity is that. What you lived. For so many years, that's who you are. And then you get out of that and it's like, well, who am I? And that it is a fairy thing, new word, a fairy thing, a fearful thing.
Indeed.
But, we have to be brave enough to take that first step and to recognize the importance of being true to ourselves. So.
And I decided a long time ago when I was going through this that I was going to, there was like a fork in the road for me. Deconvert and just disappear, or deconvert and be vocal and visible. And I said, if me being visible and vocal could keep somebody else going from that dark period, then I'm going to do it. So I'm going to take it on the chin for all the people who don't know what it's like on the other side. They could look at me and find cover and say, okay, at least there's him. He's taking the brunt of the fire. So I could kind of sneak out the door while they're all looking at Brady. Abusing him.
Oh, for sure. Well, this has been great.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's going to help many, many people.
I hope so. And my apologies for my laptop. I don't know why
No,
it
it's all
died,
good.
but
It's all
it did. Okay.
Hey, it worked out. It worked out.
All right. Well,
thank you so much.
I will see you Sunday for Nurch.
That's what's up. Much love to you, Aunt Kathy.
Much love back.
All right.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you.